Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome for today's event where we're going to talk about why Strapi might be the best alternative to WordPress for agencies. And I'm joined here with Bart. And while everyone is jumping in here into chat, let us know where you're from, how things are going. And while we wait for folks to fill up and tell us where they're from, they'll be exciting. But in the meantime, if you don't know, Strapi builds an amazing headless CMS. I really love it. Bart loves it. Really good way to manage content. And I'm Paul. I work as a developer advocate, and I'm joined with Bart. And Bart, would you like to do a quick intro to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, everyone. Bart Sokowski here. I am the sales engineer at Strapi. So really working with our sales team, helping our prospective clients learn about Strapi, determine if it is the right platform for them, and help them understand the ins and outs of it and the nuances of deploying, of creating content models, of developing with it, all sorts of goodies.
Nice. Awesome. And by the way, this will be recorded and replayed on our YouTube channel. So if you missed it or weren't not able to attend, it's perfectly fine. But we did want to go over and talk about just about WordPress in general with all the things that are going on. Some people are asking what are the alternatives. I feel like depending on your project and what you're building, you do have to pick the best tool for the job. And today we just want to talk about where Strapi fits in and is it the right decision for you? We'd like to think so. And we have a lot of cool stuff that we're going to showcase. We're also going to talk about what to consider when going through the migration process and migrating your project. So that's going to be pretty exciting. And most importantly, hopefully we all will have fun. And Noah's joining here saying hello. Hello. And let us know where all of you are joining in from. And don't be shy to ask questions in the chat. Bart and I, we want to keep this very conversational. And we might have some secret guests joining in to say hello. If they pop into the stream, we'll introduce them as they come in. But for now, I guess we're going to get started. And Bart, I'm going to bring this to you. And let's set the stage by talking about WordPress Landscape and where WordPress fits today.
Yeah, so it's important to set the stage. So this is something that Paul and I have been chatting about as we've been going through. We're understanding kind of the landscape. And prior to myself being here at Strapi and being your sales engineer, I was a developer at a number of different agencies. So I have some experience with Strapi, with WordPress, and moving folks over to the Strapi side of things. But really, I think we just to set the stage and understand where we're at. Where does WordPress fit in today? It's before in the last few years, it was really known for this reliable hosting options, a strong community support, this large user base. I know that it always varies in terms of the percentage, but I know there's always a large percentage of sites online that use WordPress. So that was a strong support there. Now, as WordPress has matured and gotten older and older, there's always confusion about where WordPress belongs. Complicated by a lot of different plugins, different page builders, different development paths, and that sort of makes the experience a little bit more challenging and not as straightforward as one would assume.
Yeah, and it's funny, we were discussing like the type of developers that exist in WordPress, and I mentioned in the past, my previous life, I used to have my small business. I used to teach Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and I had my company website, which was powered with WordPress. And for me, the experience was using like an editor, like Elementor, to do everything like really quickly, not realizing what the trade-off you're making when you combining your data with your presentation layer. And I was like, I don't know anything about tech. I just want to be able to make this really quickly. And this kind of comes up to this question. There's obviously other services like Squarespace and other things like that fit a certain demographic. And I guess like from your experience where you worked for bigger agencies, you weren't like the solo dude running his own business, like company from, let me just put stuff out there, but you actually worked with companies that build WordPress, like custom projects. And there's that divide of people that want to build custom WordPress or custom solutions versus someone that just need an easy, quick builder because they want to do their quick, easy website for their local business. Can you talk a little bit about your experience and the plan for us that we're going to take and why.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is in preparation for this call. Paul and I had chatted quite a bit about our experiences with developing at or for other folks and at other agencies. And we really realized how different folks develop with WordPress. Specifically, Paul had mentioned Elementor, using a page builder. I've certainly run into those kind of things, whether it was WP Bakery, there's one with a beaver, I forget the name of it specifically. However, when I was developing with Strapi, especially Strapi, I keep saying Strapi because I keep thinking about it.
Best.
When I was working with WordPress, I was very much in the custom development side of things. So we did not use very many plugins. We had 3 that I used just about every time, and that was it. And that was advanced custom fields, Gravity Forms, or some other form-based submission item, and Yoast for SEO. And frankly, I think, Paul, we were talking in preparation for this call as well about looking at some of our old projects that we had done in WordPress. And I was taking a look at them, and it really, with the advanced custom fields part of things, you're essentially able to create a dashboard. And then I looked at my code. I'm like, man, I'm just putting in this ACF item into a WordPress front end, but essentially developing it with Tailwind or my own custom SaaS, the SaaS processor. And really just putting those items there. And it was really just a custom build completely. So there's so many different varying development styles that really, if you're looking for help, if you're looking for support, you really have to go down a rabbit hole to troubleshoot and figure out what you need. So there are a lot of questions that come up when you're developing with WordPress, and how are you using it? How are you developing with it? Because these things vary wildly. And as to our point here, developing with Elementor and developing with a completely custom ACF build, totally different.
Yeah, and one of the things that I realized, and this is why I lean into more of the headless approach, is that without tying in your data to your presentation layer, like your website, the migration and management of your data is much easier, much more straightforward, more maintainable. And I think that is like a huge benefit. And I think if you're going to have or stay on WordPress forever, which is a viable option, it's fine. But looking to migrate, or you want to change your front end, or some people try to use WordPress as a headless option, it's just so much harder has been in my experience, that for me, I much rather be like, hey, I have all my data structured in Strapi with all the things that I need. And if I need to update the front end, I could easily do that. And because of my ADHD, that happens more often than you think. And so this kind of like idea of having that flexibility really makes sense. And later, when we take a look at like things to consider when migrating from WordPress, you're probably going to see some of the pain points that you might encounter. But like you said, different types of development. If you're more of a theme-based solution where you just non-technical, WordPress with Elementor or Squarespace might be the right choice for you. But to build custom things that really tailored for certain businesses or agencies, custom builds is definitely the place to go. And this is why we want to make a case here for Strapi that is a very powerful option. From your standpoint, working with WordPress and now working with Strapi, like, who is Strapi for in your mindset from that perspective of I worked with WordPress before?
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely that custom build developer. I think one personal anecdote that I can mention here is having built for agencies with Strapi and then not Strapi. To your point about headless WordPress, the last project I worked on prior to joining Strapi was a headless WordPress build, and after using Strapi, it was a night and day difference. And once you're transitioning and trying to do something that's a little bit out of the ordinary with something like WordPress, headless WordPress, certainly not out of the ordinary, but not necessarily its main purpose. Seeing how something like Strapi functions versus how something like WordPress functions is night and day difference. And frankly, if I at that agency had the sway, I would have pushed super hard for Strapi because it would have helped us exponentially in build time and processing. But really, again, that sort of build process is for those custom build developers. You want to make sure that you have a custom design, your site is ready to go, and you're using really those kind of development ideas, right? Using those custom fields, Gravity Forms, Yoast. That's the developer that I think would best transition over to Strapi.
Yeah, and that makes sense. And I know some of the points you and I discussed, this concept of having custom control over your content and design and keeping those two separate, I think gives you wealth of flexibility because you're now able to leverage more of the modern frameworks like Next.js, Astro, Remix, and you're able to decouple the presentation layer from the way you manage content. I think gives you that freedom to have a much more maintainable project. And you can deploy Strapi backend, Strapi Cloud, of course, but you're also free to deploy it in any other places like AWS, like Google Cloud, or services like DigitalOcean. So you have that flexibility, which gives you the freedom to manage your data the way that you want. Can we talk a little bit about like the key differences between WordPress and Strapi from your perspective?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things for me when I transitioned, it was specifically a client that, or rather an agency that I was working for. We really needed a proof of concept that Strapi was the right move. And what we ended up doing is rebuilding the agency's site. It was a WordPress build, but the agency was very design focused. So there was a lot of video, a lot of images, a lot of those kind of items. So we were able to rebuild this in a Strapi Next.js build. It turned out great. The performance shot way up, and that was big. In terms of the differences for the editors, because of course it wasn't the development team that was going to be adding content, right? We had an employee page, if a new employee joined, that wasn't the developer's job to add them. That was the account managers to add them. So for the account managers, I think it was a very easy transition, understanding that they were used to creating items with ACF and WordPress and Yoast. They saw the dashboard, they saw our collection types, they saw the single types, and they were able to do that. However, if you are used to that native page builder experience, that's something that as a developer, you'll have to think about and consider as you're building out your Strapi build. Additionally, it's a decoupled and headless environment in Strapi. You're looking at the content and the front end being developed independently, which actually worked out really great for our team. We had such a wide variety of experience, be it an account manager who had just moved to the dev team, having been taught development by their partner, to a senior developer who had been at the company for years. We were all able to use Strapi effectively, but additionally, we were able to continue building that. And one language for backend and front end, if you're using a JavaScript framework, you're able to do that within Strapi and still keep that development mindset when you're customizing Strapi, because we are JavaScript Node.js.
Yeah, and I love that flexibility that you are able to use one language for everything. And again, leverage some of the more modern frameworks, which I think is really cool. And again, to your point, you did say the core benefit, content model first approach. You design your content structure the way you want to structure your data, the way it makes sense. And that is managed by Strapi. And that makes it very flexible and easy. And again, I keep coming back to this idea, maintainability, flexibility. You're able to deliver content to multi-channels. I was just talking earlier to someone who was like, yes, we're going to have our website, but we also want to have ability to deliver that content for our mobile React Native app that only needs this type of content, and you're able to do it. So from the point of maintainability, organization, and performance, and also if you need to update the front end or migration, that process will be a little bit easier because you have this separation of concerns. And because we're talking about all these things, people probably want to be like, show us some stuff. So we have a new project called the Launchpad. It is amazing. You could try it out yourself. But today, Bart is going to walk through some of the features of what it looks like on the front end. We're using Next.js. Huge shout outs to Maxime, who handled that whole process, building this cool demo for us. But without any ado, Bart, let's take it away. Let's jump in and take a look at what's happening.
Yeah, and thanks for the intro, and really thank you for the folks who have worked on this. Maxime has done a great job on our Launchpad application, and I'll take you through some of the items within Launchpad and relate them a little bit to folks who might be thinking about that transition. Ultimately, when I talk about Strapi and think about Strapi, it's not just a page builder, right? It's far more than just a page builder. And one of the big things to understand is when you're building out with Strapi, you're building out not just that page, but your digital experience as a whole. This content being sent over the API can be used in your certainly web page, but on your mobile application. It can be used if you are using other parts of your digital experience, be it a digital sign, a digital ad, the mobile app, the website, etc. So keep that in mind as you're going through. This isn't just stuck on a web page. This can be used in multiple areas. If you are transitioning from a more traditional build, you'll want some of those more traditional items that you're used to. And as someone who built a lot of ACF custom pages, sites, I should say, this is where I think Strapi really shined. And in our Launchpad application, we have this pages collection type. So I'll click into that. And pages is a wonderful example of how we can build a very flexible for our content editors experience. Yet as developers, make sure that our content is correctly being displayed and managed for our use case. So I'm actually going to go ahead and talk a little bit about our FAQ page that we've created. So in our FAQ page, you can see we've created a slug field. We've got a dynamic zone, which corresponds very well to the flexible content that you'll find in advanced custom fields. In our dynamic zone, what we have is a number of components. Now, in this dynamic zone specifically, 10 total components. So as a page editor, what I can do is pick exactly what I need for my page. So let's say I've got a hero that I want to add to this one, and I can expand it. I've got CTAs that I can add. I've got headings. And all of these fields that you're seeing within the Strapi instance, you can add these by default within Strapi. These are all available within the content type builder. And what's great is our content type builder is also visual. So you can visually see what options you have, whether you want a long text, short text, etc. So that's all very great. But going back to the dynamic zone, obviously the hero, that's not going to be the last component, right? We want that to be first. Very easily drag and drop, add it there, and we've got it right in front of all of our other components. This is a great way of making sure that you're keeping your content flexible, your content editors happy by being able to give them the ability to affect change on the front end, but making sure as a developer that you've created the components that you need and keeping that gate up a little bit, making sure that you understand that this is how this will work and I've developed it this way, and you can create it flexibly as well. One additional thing to keep in mind here too is we also have these relational fields. And remember what I talked about, the digital experience. This is a great way to continue that digital experience. So in this case, for example, we've got an FAQ component. This component has a relation with our FAQs. This is great because now if I need to use these FAQs in my mobile application, if I have, for example, a digital experience that requires me to have these FAQs listed on a digital sign, a digital board, and that board can pull in via the REST API or GraphQL this data, you have an FAQ endpoint right here. So I can go directly to my endpoint. It's not just stuck in a page builder. I don't have to do a nested call for this information. I've got it organized, created, and ready to go. So this is a great way of making sure that these collection types are available. And if you are coming from WordPress, think of collection types as custom posts. That's the best way to think of it. As soon as I said that to my account managers when I trained them up on Strapi, they knew exactly what I was talking about. So this is a great way to think about it in that way. Lastly, I do want to talk about a bit of our plugins, right? I think a big part of the situation in WordPress is plugins. I think we've all, if you've worked with WordPress, you've seen them. Sometimes you've seen them be a little cluttered, if just to put it lightly, on a build that you might have inherited that someone else built and then it was used throughout its lifespan. Strapi has a huge marketplace. Market.strapi.io shows you a lot of the community built plugins that you can use. And what's great about Strapi is when you build a plugin yourself, firstly, you can build what you would like. We have a design system that allows you to make your plugin look as if it were a native feature, but there's a number of different things you can do. In my articles collection type here, what I've done is added our color field, which is a plugin that we at Strapi have created. It's available in the marketplace. So this is an example of something you can create. You can create a custom field for yourself to really add to your Strapi experience. There's, again, a plethora of different plugins and a lot of different items that you can do there. We have an SDK with Strapi 5 that takes you through the creation suite and really allows you to create what you need. And lastly, with plugins, they are required to be installed by a developer. So really, I think that's one of the things that I've personally experienced quite a bit is plugin bloat, if you will. And I think that's a great way to make sure that you're adding the plugins that you actually need to your site and using them appropriately.
I like that decision falls on the developer, because that way the chances of you breaking your app in production, it's almost impossible, because you don't get that access in production environment. So like that, because when I had WordPress at the beginning, there's times where I would install something, make a change, and then it would not do the thing that I want. I'll be like, oh my gosh, I just broke my website. What is going on here right now? But I do want to, add the school call out. Yeah, plugins and custom fields in Strapi is amazing, because a lot of times you're literally limited by your imagination of the things that you could add. We have Alex, he's known by Webbers in the community, who I recently joined the Strapi team. He showed me one of the websites that he was working on, and he created like really cool custom fields that in the future we'll talk more about. He created a whole like calendar field where you could easily set your like schedule to show on your website. And I was like, oh, that's really cool. Another shout out that I want to say, I love that in Strapi 5, you're able to have draft and publish features. So you could safely have article that you're working in that is in draft state, and then you also have the published state of your article that is published. Yeah, and so I think that's awesome that you're able to work on a draft without worrying about messing up like the published thing. And another thing that I want to shout out here, you have like content here, and you have the block editor, and some people, and this is something approach that I see in WordPress, and I think this is something that really depends on, like we could have a long discussion, but a lot of times when people use that content section, and in WordPress, they have the Gutenberg editor. Yeah, it's cool. You could visually lay out your content. But the thing that I have is that I think when you're structuring your content, you got to think about it. I don't just want to stuff all the HTML and the data mixed together. I want to have a clear separation between the way I organize the content, because the most important part here is that you want to have your content that could be used in many different channels. So as soon as you start adding styling within the editor or saving HTML, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that approach. You're really making it hard, making that content shareable along other things. And can you preview a draft version on the page? So that's a great question. That is a feature we're working on, and we'll let you know more about it. Just to give you some context, in Strapi 4, we had a community build preview button, which you're able to click on, and it will take you to your website to preview your content. But now we want to make this more of a core experience to Strapi. So we're actually working on our own implementation and version of that, which allow you to preview the content. And we will add some more additional features to eventually give you inline editing. And we have a question from Jerry. Can you explain how versioning works in combination with new preview, draft, and published of content? Can you explain the versioning works in combination with new preview, draft? So Strapi has the community edition and enterprise edition, and we have a couple of different features. And in the community edition, the way it works, you have your content and you're able to have a draft state for that content. So that way you could have your published state and you could have your draft state that you work on. But when you have we also have the content history, which is part of the EE. And this is what Bart is showing. And can you walk us through this feature quickly, Bart? Since we have this great question.
Absolutely. So the way content history works is we've already explained draft and publish as it is in Strapi 5 in the community edition. As Paul was talking, I've been playing around and demonstrating it, right? If just to bring everyone in, for example, I've been editing this draft of this 5 reasons article. I have the subheading that says, you won't believe number 2 and 3, for example, just to make it a little bit more. I clicked on the published version, and that change that I made is saved in draft, but I have not published it yet. So I've got my draft version that has, you won't believe number 2 and 3. I've also changed the description a little bit. And then the published version, you can see that it changed from we will to I will as the first statement. And here I've only got number 2 instead of 2 and 3. Now, that's available in community. The content history in the enterprise edition is available in this menu here. So on click, you can see that we have the historical entries of all of our content here. And as you can see, I've been playing with this piece of content for quite a bit, going back all the way to last week and then further. So in this case, you can see a number of different historical entries that I've had within my Strapi instance. So you can see here, I've been changing and playing with it. The modified state simply tells me that this is the draft version, but we have a separate published version. You can see here that the published version from the 5th of November has changed a little bit. And also Strapi calls out that we have a new field. In this case, I've actually added this color field as a separate field, and Strapi calls that out directly. So we know that field is not available. So in this case, let's say I want to revert back to this historical entry of my piece of content. If I hit the restore button, it's simply going to give me restore. And you'll notice that it restored that content into the draft. So that content that we had in published, this stays. The draft version is what we've restored. So we've got that same historical entry in our draft. So now we can publish from here if we like. If we want to use that as the starting point to continue editing our content or creating a new piece of content, or really just use that as a starting point, we certainly can. But that's essentially how our current content history feature.
Yeah, no, that's really awesome. And a lot of times we do go back and forth because we do have some users that like we want to visually be able to have a page builder that will allow me to do everything I want in my content block. And I think in some cases that does make sense. And in other cases, what I think people are asking for is the ability to easily allow non-technical users to edit their content. And that's something that we're working on. But I, especially working to prepare for this webinar, I was going through a process of what would it take to migrate a project from WordPress to Strapi, and any place where data and the HTML was mixed together, it was like, oh my gosh, this is not as easy as we thought. And we are joined here by Rodrigo, one of our partners from TEDx. Thank you for joining us. And we actually about to jump into migration part of this. I will let you, since you're here, let us have you introduce yourself first, so that way people know who you are. Tell us a little bit about yourself and where you're coming from.
Hey guys, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, sound good. Thank you.
Hi everyone. My apologies. I'm not even going to lie to you about why I just jumped in. It's 3 a.m. here in Australia.
Oh no, my God. I will think it's my fault for scheduling. But thank you so much. Thank you.
The funny thing is that I thought I put the alarm on, but I said it wrong, obviously, because
No worries. No worries.
So guys, Rodrigo here from TEDx. I'm the head of digital pretty much here at TEDx. That we specialize in TEDx solutions and development, provisioning around front-end, back-end development, and also we're quite heavily developing a few solutions with AI/Strapi in the mix of that. So we try to leverage no code to low code wherever we can, and we see Strapi more of a low-code solution for us, where we manage to develop as quick as possible and deliver the maximum premium value in the less possible times. For us, that's how we view Strapi from that point of view, aside from the power that we get from the backend development by being able to get our hands dirty in there.
Yeah, no, that is awesome. So I also did a quick shout out to the website. It's really awesome. Before, I know you wanted to share something with us today. I wanted to start the conversation talking about my migration process from WordPress, and then Rodrigo, I'll have you jump in and give us what your experience has been and stuff like that. So what I've done, I went ahead and set up a local instance of WordPress, and today I'm going to show you a piece of a migration or the thought process of thinking. And one thing that I learned, there's many ways to think about the process. Oddly, while preparing for this, when you search how to migrate from WordPress, they only show examples how to migrate your WordPress to WordPress, which I'm like, you're not helping me. But the cool part is that WordPress has an API that allows you to get all your data in JSON. And does this look attractive? This is just lots of HTML with data in it. I think storing HTML with data, my personal feeling is that it's just a lot harder to work for, but this is the case. This is what and how the data is represented in WordPress in this instance of the project. And I decided to just focus on one piece of it, which is this blog post section. So in WordPress, we have all our posts, and here they are. And if we take a look at the post, they're using the Gutenberg editor, which allows you to structure your data. But as we saw, this does combine your presentation, your HTML, and your data together. And so the challenge that I had is great. I get this awesome response, but I do need to figure out how to parse this data. So my thought process was, let me think about the content that I have here in WordPress. And when I took a look at this and I took a look at the JSON format, I was like, okay, we have our slug, we have our title, and we have our content. And I thought about it. There's many ways we could represent this in Strapi, but I thought, what would be the simplest thing for me to do for this example? But we could do it in many different ways. For instance, if we take a look at my content manager, actually, let me go to content type builder. We have our posts data structure. And for this demo, I wanted to keep it simple. And you can represent this with components and dynamic zones. But I wanted to focus on two of our built-in content editors that we have. We have our rich text markdown, which you're able to represent your content in markdown. And we have our blocks content editor, which allows you to represent your content in JSON blocks, which gives you like a cool experience, which you're able to write your data. And the key here is that we don't want to, I don't want to say pollute, but take our HTML data and stick into our block content, because to me, I think that just makes it very hard to manage, maintain. So once I looked at the JSON and once I decided how to map my WordPress content to Strapi, and that's the consideration you take. Understand how your data is stored in Strapi, understand how you're going to create a similar structure that makes sense in Strapi. And once you have that, this is the part where there's many ways to do that. In my case, because I know we could hit the API here that we have here, I wrote a separate migration script, and I'm not going to bore you with all the details. I will share the repo here to take a look at the example. But what I'm doing here is I'm fetching all my data from Strapi now that I know from WordPress, now that I know how I wanted to live in Strapi. So I have the fetch WordPress data, which gets my JSON. And then I have this other function called import WordPress data, which I'm doing a couple of different things here, but the most important thing is we did look at the content structure of WordPress. It's a bunch of HTML here, not straightforward. So I needed to figure out a way how to go through this process and to convert it into a usable format. And so I found this package turnaround, which allows you to take HTML and convert it to Markdown. And the reason why I did it this way, because once I had Markdown, I pulled in another library called Marked, which allowed me to take that Markdown and convert it to a JSON structure, which our block editor expects. So in my Strapi application, I showed you that we have two different, and I'll show you example, two different ways to represent content. We have the rich text markdown, which perfect. I figured out how to convert HTML to markdown, so that's going to work nice. And then we have our rich text block editor, which is a JSON-based rich text editor, which I took that into account in my script to be like, hey, let me figure out a way to convert that. Once I wrote that intermediary script that's going to take that data and upload it, I also took into account, wait a second, WordPress data here, if I take a look, it has images in the post. So I have to take that into account. So in the script, I was like, hey, not only do I need to be able to parse my markdown to the JSON object, I need to understand that I need to take the images that we get from our HTML and upload them on the fly. And I'll share this snippet for the script so you could use that as an example, but I created a function process markdown images, which will parse the image URL from WordPress, and then you are able to make an API call to Strapi, take that image from WordPress and upload it to Strapi. And so the thing that I wanted to say here quickly before I show you the demo, and if you have any questions about this, definitely let me know. In Strapi, if you take a look under users permissions and roles and look under public, that all your endpoints, they have or all your content collection types, they have an API endpoint. And so I'm able to directly add the content to Strapi via API. And that's what I'm doing. My posts, I will be using the create endpoint. I'll be making a post request to this endpoint to upload my content. And then for our uploads, I enabled upload option for our image upload API endpoint that will allow me to upload the content. And so what the script is going to do, and I'll try to explain it better than I'm doing so far, is it's taking the JSON data from WordPress, it's parsing it into something a little bit more easier, which was Markdown in my case. It's finding all the image elements, it's pulling out the URL, and it's uploading that data to Strapi. And so if this sounds complex, sometimes when you're working with data that's embedded in HTML, that's something that you have to take into account. And this is why I love this approach of Strapi, where we want to separate your data from your presentation to keep it simple. So now I gave this huge talk, moment of truth. So here in my terminal, I'm going to run my script that lives outside of my Strapi project. So this is just a one-time script that you could run. I made a command called yarn migrate. It's going to go through all my entries, and it's going to go ahead and add those items. So if my script finishes, if I refresh here, you're going to see that I have all my post content. If I take a look here, not only is this represented in our Markdown, I get all the images, and we also have our text block editor. The one thing I didn't have time to do is to update this to get the images. But here's the cool part, because I uploaded the images and I have this reference to the image via the file name. And of course you could write a script to do that. I unfortunately didn't have the time, but since this already lives in my media folder, right? Here's all the images from WordPress, which is amazing. They're in my Strapi instance. I am now able to go to any of the, and you wouldn't do this manually, but I'm just going to show you because we already uploaded this image. I'm able to just go ahead and say, hey, add an image, and I'm going to go into my uploads, and I'm going to, since I had the reference for the name of the image, I'm able to find it and just say, okay, let me add it here, and boom, we have our image. So the one challenge that I was going to say, the biggest thing when going from WordPress to Strapi, take your time, understand how you're storing your data in WordPress, and understand what's the easiest way to take that data out of WordPress. In this example, I used WordPress API, but I know that WordPress has a couple of different plugins. One of the plugins that I saw, it's called WP All Export, which allows you to export all the data into CSV. You still would have to parse it, but there's many ways of doing it. But as you saw from Strapi's side of things, it's very easy to add data to Strapi because we expose all those endpoints. And with that, I'm going to pass it to Rodrigo, have him talk from his experience. And the one caveat I was going to say, I had one WordPress website. This is something I needed to do one time, and maybe this naive approach works for me. But I know with agencies who work with multiple companies that work on migrations from WordPress to Strapi, they probably have very specific workflows and systems that they already have in place. And sometimes working with an agency like TEDx, it makes sense to have them help you with your needs. But with that being said, Rodrigo, I'm going to give you the floor.
Awesome. Thanks, Paul. So that's a great example. And it's funny because on our side, we've also played around with the code side of migration. And over the years, when you're migrating across from WordPress to any other system, so the challenges that you come across is the complexity in the signs and plugins that are used within your WordPress instance. So that plays a huge factor on how you're going to be able to migrate that cleanly over to your new platform. So keeping that in mind, that the migration cost is actually can be quite high when you start to get on the nitty-gritty of migrating that content. And a lot of the times you end up doing a 50-50 split of migrating and mapping the content manually and trying to migrate some of that across automatically. And normally what you look at is the pages and posts as the most successful way of migrating that content across. So one of the things that we've seen from our experience is that, yes, you can code it as Paul demonstrated, but as you start getting into the content, you have things like shortcodes and other plugin data that gets plugged in there. So then what you get is that you have a more of an unknown quantity of effort that you're going to have to be able to work with. So one of the approaches that we're currently considering is that when you're migrating, you want to be able to also look at the redirects. So for example, for larger websites, the redirect management and the SEO is one of the biggest aspects of that migration, right? Because you don't want to be throwing away all that money that you spent on SEO, and you want to be able to keep as much of that. So one of the ways that we're looking to solve this issue is by using automation and in being able to crawl through the websites. And with all the advancements in technology, especially this year, you're able to essentially use tools that are going to be able to scan your entire website, not just looking at the site map itself, but just the entire website available within the live stream, crawl through each one of them, and then be able to detect the redirects. So you're able to then fetch that data and build the redirect schema as you're fetching that data. So not only do you get the data, you get the redirect management across with that. And just like Paul demonstrated, you're able to then fetch, because we're going to be able to scrape the data, you're able to fetch the entire content set along with categories and what have you without hardly touching any code, which enables the speed for delivery there when you're approaching from that point of view. So what I'll do is I'll very quickly share my screen. Give me 1 second.
Yeah, I think this is just a good point to be like the agencies that have done this process many times probably have a good system that will help you, because a lot of times people have this question, do I do it by myself or do I reach out to someone with help? And I think in some cases, you reaching out to someone who's done this before makes perfect sense. Oh my gosh, hold on, Rodrigo, before you even start saying anything, I was thinking about something similar, and I was actually going to ask, has anybody considered doing what you're about to do? I'm so excited to this because I think you're going to answer my question. Let's do this. I'm so excited.
So this is we're working on a much bigger picture. So I'm going to show you the bare bones of the basics, all right, and how simple it can be, for example. So let's just say, for example, that instead of using a spreadsheet, we could essentially use the export XML provided within Strapi, right? So then what we can do is we would utilize that export XML for the pages and posts to do that dynamically. In this case, I'm going to demonstrate it manually where we enter URLs onto this sheet here. And then what we're going to do is we're going to fetch that automatically using this automation that we've got here. And it's going to go through using this tool Firecrawl, which automatically starts to crawl through that website and fetching all the markdown in a formatted output that we see as a JSON. And then what we'll see is that, let me just run that very quickly. So let's just hope that the demo gods are with me. I was actually demonstrated earlier and I had a bit of a failure. So demo gods are down on me.
Yeah, it's totally understandable. But I was going to say, this is exactly something that I arrived at as a pain point of doing manual migration the way I did. I was like, there's got to be an easier way. And I was like, is there a way to create automated workflow and use an LLM to help with that? And by the way, if folks are not familiar, N8N is basically an amazing tool that could be self-hosted. It allows you to visually build cool LLM workflows, and it's pretty amazing. So, Rodrigo, I think you basically read my mind of my pain point, and you created a solution that I needed right at this minute. So I'm super excited.
Yeah, so the beauty with these guys is that, as I said, this is the bare bones. We've got a much bigger flow that's doing a lot more, but I'm not going to show you that now because it's a bit broken at the moment. But basically, there's many different steps that we'll take from this. We're going to be adding agents that are going to be performing the steps that I mentioned earlier, for example. So we're going to be able to crawl through the entire website, look at all the redirects, and as we build the redirects, being able to scrape each of those URL items, and then being able to create those as entries to then be inserted into Strapi. For example, in the mix here, this is taking longer than what it should, so I hope that it's going to be okay. The output essentially will be here, right? And this is going to show us the data in here, or it should show us the data. But essentially, this is the endpoint where Strapi will reach the entry form, where we have an endpoint could be like a migration endpoint, for example, fetch that data and then automatically insert it where you want to, while the background is then updating images to the media folder and generating all the associated data with that.
Yeah, and what's cool about N8N, they do have a direct implementation for Strapi, so that's cool. But yeah, I think this is like a really good approach, and you're uh, limited here by just like the imagination of what kind of workflow you want to make. I think it's like a really cool tool, and here you see that. Nice.
Okay, so this is not running in sync, but we do have some output here. All right, so as we can see here, so what do we see? And this is part of the beauty of using this tool. I'm not sure what's going on there, but we've got some output here. So basically, the URLs that I've used on the scrape, I've got a post and I've got a page. Okay, now on the post itself, you can see that I've selected the data that I want to pull. In this case, I've told it to just fetch the title, for example, under that metadata key, the description. In here, we see the feature image, for example, the category that it falls under, and then down here somewhere, I've got the slug. So I've done all of this using an LLM tool on the background to say, hey, do this with this data and put it in the format that we're looking for. Then the output itself, the content, is this right here. So we've got the title of the page and the sections within that actual page itself. So if I was to go to, for example, if I was to go to this post, we see that we have this post with those sections there. And then if I go to this one right here, you can see that the content structure is broken down into the sections that we see on this tab right here. So then we can very easily migrate that and insert it into our components on Strapi as a structured data, for example. And the thing is, the effort that it took to do this, it's not even half an hour. That's how quickly you can actually get cracking when you're looking to migrate by scraping the entire
Here's
website.
the crazy thing. I'm going to say this because this is something that I eventually was quite like thinking about if this is a legit approach, and seeing you demonstrate it's amazing, because what I found out that me writing a custom script to take into account that H output and convert it to all the various like Markdown or JSON, if you just ask it via prompt, one of the LLMs, they have much easier time converting that to the data format that you need. And that's one thing that I like about LLMs. Like some things they're good at, some things you're like, okay, maybe it'll hallucinate. But one thing that they're been kind of to do very well is to take a structure in one format and convert it to another. And it does simplify the process, which I think is really awesome.
That's right. And it's actually, and I'll just quickly give you a view into what that prompt looks like, for example. So here's part of the prompt that we've structured, right? So here I'm telling it, giving some detail as to what I wanted to do, the instructions that I wanted to perform, for example, and the source URL essentially, and then I provide it with an example. Now, there are differences in performance between LLM models, for example. In this case, for this particular demo, I'm using OpenAI, but we're finding that Claude provides a much better output with less effort in the prompt. So we're experimenting with those two at the moment. But basically, these are one of the biggest challenges when migrating from WordPress to any platform, not just Strapi, but any platform in particularly. And the beauty of this is that you can essentially use a tool like this to migrate from any system into Strapi to easily insert that into the collection types. So that's what's the beauty and the speed of this is just amazing.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. Great demo. And definitely share the link to TEDx so people could learn more. And before we go into questions, before I continue, Rodrigo, is there any other points that you want to add to this, or what?
So I think that you covered most of it, Paul. I think then just to touch on the migration part, you've got things like the export XMLs that you can pull out. You've got options such as the RSS feeds, for example, that can also enable you to migrate from WordPress to Strapi. But each of those approaches will always require that extra bit of code effort and then having to play around with the content types and shortcodes that are inserted with each of the plugins. So that's one of the challenges. It's just that every WordPress enables you to create a page in so many different ways that at the end of the day, the format that you pull is always going to be tricky. So
Yes.
just keep a lookout for that.
And I think your approach to scraping versus trying to pull out, like I did, each individual format, because I definitely know 100% that if my website had Gutenberg, that's one format. If it had Elementor, it would be something else. If it had that Beaver page builder, it would be something else. And you know what? At this point, you're right. You're better off scraping the website and using like tools like you demonstrated to structure it in the format that you know is going to make perfect sense for Strapi. And this also showcases like this challenge tools which combine presentation layer with the data, that the migration is just never easy. And I think like the benefit of Strapi, once you move your data to Strapi, you could represent it on the front end however way you like, but it's so organized and structured that helps to add that stability, that like being able to manage easily and not run into these type of issues in the future. And so what I'm going to do is just briefly do another call out to one of our partners. And part of this is on me, is because we wanted to talk about WordPress, because everybody's talking about WordPress and we want to give our take from Strapi's standpoint. Not saying like, WordPress is great for some things, and we just want to make a case for Strapi, why we feel like Strapi is a great solution and why. But we had another partner from Virtual Labs, Jacob. They actually went through lots of different websites that they migrated from WordPress to Strapi. And so he did send me a note. He wasn't able to attend today. And again, it's part of me because this was done in such a short period. And a huge shout out to you, Rodrigo, waking up at 3 a.m. to say and do this amazing presentation for us. But I'm just going to give like a really quick shout out to our Virtual Labs. And so you could, of course, learn about them as well. And we have our, if you want to see all our partners, you could find them on Strapi. Rodrigo is from TEDx. But so some of the experience that Jacob said, that in their case, it definitely made sense moving from WordPress to Strapi because they wanted to have the performance increase. Again, you decide what you want to keep in the project, not have it be bloated from all the plugins and stuff like that. And then also, once the challenge they had is because they were coming from WordPress to Strapi, there was this mental model shift that needed to happen. And they felt like at the beginning, they were like struggling a little bit because they were trying to use Strapi at WordPress. And then the key point that he highlighted, Strapi is Strapi, and it does things the way that from content first approach. And once they made that shift, they like realized the huge power of Strapi. And some of the challenges that they had is basically figuring out how to go from the WordPress data and how to migrate it to Strapi using the Strapi collection types and content types. And with Rodrigo's presentation, we found out that you can create an LLM workflow that does simplify that process, so you don't have to go through that painful migration steps that I did by creating that custom script myself. And you're free to do so wherever your strengths are. You're able to do that. And what Jacob said, they're very happy that they went with Strapi. And so you could definitely, if you're looking for agencies, definitely reach out to TEDx with Rodrigo, and keep in mind that Strapi is not by itself. We do have lots of different partners that can help you with your needs. And so with that final bit out of the way, I guess we short on time, but let's take a look at some questions and final points that we will all want to make. But before we do that, everybody who's in chat, thank you so much for joining us. And let's see if we have any questions. So Brandon wants to play the devil's advocate for a second. How big of a market is headless WordPress? It feels minuscule. WordPress is a large part because you don't need to open VS Code. And Brandon, like, you make a good point, and I think it really depends on the use case. This is why I never said don't use WordPress. I think every use case, you need to pick the right tool for the job. And for sometimes it's WordPress, sometimes it's Squarespace. And I think, again, depending, one thing that I found out, like when I first came to Strapi, the thing that I was sold on Strapi as a developer, it allowed me to save thousands of hours of development time by not having to build that myself. And it gave me the flexibility to structure my project the way that I want to structure that. use the framework that I want to use. I really love Next.js. I also like Astro, Remix. And to me, I built multiple projects for clients that need very specific requirements. Another thing that I was going to say, WordPress, it ties you down to the ecosystem. I'll give you one quick example. So I am building a Next.js project which uses Strapi for part of their content. But I also have a AI implementation that is implemented literally within the Next.js application. And I like this customizability and composability that you get. You could be like, hey, Strapi is going to handle this piece of the thing. I have other things or services that I need to call. I could call them from my Next.js project, or you could move all that logic into Strapi. And to me, that's the power, it's the flexibility. And when you say I don't need to open VS Code, I would have my feelings hurt if I built something where I don't open VS Code because I'm a developer. And to your point, if someone is a non-technical user, they want to be able to have an easy approach. And this is why in Strapi, we're trying to find the middle ground where we give you the customizability for developers to build anything that they imagine, but also make the experience for non-technical users to be straightforward and easily used, from being able to manage their content, add their content. And so there's a saying, you can't make everybody happy. And I think it's true. You can't serve everybody. You need to understand the demographic of folks that you're going for and build the best product that fits their use case. And that's why Strapi is not the best solution for everything. That's why WordPress is not the best solution for everything. But in specific use cases, they're the perfect solution for you. So that was a great question. And another question, how can we connect with you, Strapi, about being partners? We care. Oh, so great question. I'll put a link in the chat here. Oh, Mark, Mark, I was going to say Bart. So Mark is the head magical being who handles all of our partner relations. I say magical being, I don't know how he functions, but if you're going to join the partner, you'll reach out. He gets all the emails. He'll love to chat with you. Amazing individual. So great question, that. And Bart, thank you for that. Let's see what else. Can we have a small, we actually have a small version of how we can done in a Launchpad application. That's Bart's comment. Bart, you're not allowed to ask questions. I'm just going to feel that Brad approach is better. I feel that Brad's approach is better for more website. Rodrigo's is better for more. Yeah, and 100%. So what I would say, you need to take into account like how much data or how big is your project and figure out the best approach. To be honest, like migrations in general, they're just complex no matter where you're migrating from. If you're migrating from one platform to another, there's always a cost to that. But I feel where I really love the fact Strapi shines is the fact that it combines this idea for developers to build whatever they want, but at the same time, non-technical users have a great experience using it, manage their content. And it's like the best of both worlds. And this argument, I was just going to say, because this is something that I experience, and this is like a real concern that you need to keep in mind with WordPress. A lot of times people say WordPress is non-developer or low code. It is true. A non-technical user could set up WordPress and make their website go to production with any of the hosting services. Here's the thing, and this is coming from when I used to have my Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu school. I used WordPress to power my website, and I'm going to give you this story that happened to me being a non-technical user using WordPress. I updated a plugin, and I made a change because you're able to do it in production. I click publish. Next thing, I go to www, the name of my business. Where's my website? It's gone. I had a blank screen. I had no idea what's happening. Because I was not a developer, I had no idea how to troubleshoot WordPress that's written in PHP. And guess what I had to do? Anybody guess? I'll tell you what I did, but then I'll tell you what the smartest thing. I had to delete everything and rebuild my website again because I was not the developer. I had no idea. The smarter thing would have been for me to call a friend who knew PHP and work with WordPress and have him fix it. But this whole thing to say that WordPress, it doesn't require you to look at code, I think you could, just like Strapi, you could get started very easily, but there's no solution that is completely, at least for WordPress, no code. I would say low code, easy stuff. But anyway, but that was my anecdotal story. You don't need to hear more. I could probably talk for hours. Let's see.
Yeah, I think one thing that to both of the strategies of migrating from WordPress to Strapi or really elsewhere, I think it was something that I mentioned in the chat that I want to vocalize a little bit is Paul's example here was really using the Gutenberg editor to bring in content. But if you're using Elementor or WP Bakery or a different page builder, your data is going to look different. If you're using a custom ACF build, your data is going to look different. If you added one of those plugins that broke Paul's website, the data that was stored in the plugin, whatever it is, if it's you have 5 different carousel plugins added, that data is going to look different. So regardless of which method you use, whether you write a custom script to pull in your data or you use something similar to Rodrigo's strategy, it's going to be different. So it's important to understand where your data is coming from, how it looks when it's being pulled in from that source, and where it's going. And additionally to that point, when you are doing that migration, perhaps that's a great time to think about what portions of your data, what portions of your site do you want to keep, and what portions does it make sense to change. I think in the chat, there was an example of a nav bar. Maybe it makes sense to build out your navigation a little bit differently. Maybe it makes sense that now is the time to update that. So really, it's all up to you how you do this. The beauty of Strapi is you can go through a standard Git workflow to build out your new features, make sure that the data is migrated correctly, make sure that you've updated your schema properly, and continue developing while you have something in production, and use those standard best practices as a web developer and as a software developer.
Yeah, what I also wanted to add, like in 5, you're able to create Strapi templates. So let's say you're working on various type of projects. Maybe you have a business website that need a blog, and you could create a predefined template that you could use as a starting point to build multiple projects. Maybe you have an e-commerce store. Maybe you have something specific to something. I love that. Like with Strapi, basically the way I look at it, it's a low-code approach that you can get started easily, but it gives developers the superpower to build and integrate whatever features they want custom in code if they needed to. And because of that flexibility, I think it really, in my mind, if I was not working for Strapi and I would literally start my own agency building websites, and my flow would be Strapi for backend, Next.js or Astra for frontend. And I would just create very few templates that I could get jump started. And knowing that by leveraging Strapi, I'm saving thousands of hours of not having to recreate the wheel. And I think, what I want to say, every technology that you use, they all have trade-offs. If someone says my solution is perfect for everything, someone somewhere is not telling the truth. And so you always have to take that into account. And that's why we just want to go and talk about what Strapi does. And so you could make the informed decision to decide, should you stay on WordPress? Should you go to Strapi? I think that's decision up to you. I might be biased a little bit because I love Strapi. I love JavaScript. I love React. And so Strapi allows me to build the things with the things that I love. And I want to give you another last example why Strapi is awesome is when I was learning to code, I switched to dev later in my life. And my first job I got was pretty cool. But my second job was cooler because for some reason they trusted me to build a POC as a junior developer. And the reason they did that is because they wanted to create something that they could showcase of a new product, new offering that they're going to do. But they didn't want to have any senior engineers to do that. And as a junior engineer, I was able to build a POC using and leveraging Strapi as a backend. We use React for the front end. And what's cool is when they saw the POC, they're like, oh, this is actually a thing that our clients want. And so we're going to build it. And because React, all JavaScript, Strapi, all JavaScript, node-based, they were able to just easily bring in new engineers because finding JavaScript engineers is not that difficult. Everybody knows JavaScript. And for the owner of the company, that made perfect sense. So even though I started the project and took it as far as I was able to as a junior developer, it proved of concept showed that it works. And then they hired more engineers to help take it the rest of the way. And to me, this idea to ship fast is so important because you're able to test out your project on users quickly to decide, hey, is this idea worth approaching? And so to me, they didn't spend as much money on me as a junior dev as they would have on senior dev. So it was a win. They got to see their POC. They didn't have to spend a little bit of money on me. Yeah, I don't blame him. That was my second dev job. So it all worked out. But that's just had me sold on Strapi and moving fast. And Rodrigo and Bart, before we end the stream, any last closing points that you want to say?
Yeah, I think I just want to reinforce your point there, Paul. One of the reasons why I love Strapi is the speed at which you're able to deliver in. I've worked with organizations where they've large organizations. I'll give you an example. So Coles in Australia is one of the biggest supermarket retailers here. They had actually started their migration over to Adobe Experience at the time, and they had a backlog of 48 months.
Oh, wow.
And they couldn't deliver some of that work. So with the agency that I used to work back then, we ended up delivering a naked page using Strapi that inserted into their actual framework. And we were able to deliver solutions within a couple of weeks.
Wow.
And even their internal teams couldn't understand just how quick we were able to move in delivering the page and content at the speed that they needed from a marketing perspective and advertising perspective. From ourselves, we use Strapi to deliver most solutions because it just makes it so simple. And we see it as a framework where you're able to enhance security, use tokens, security tokens for fetching extra data. You can create silos of data where people can use that only for those particular buckets. So the development effort that you would spend on WordPress, for example, yes, you can do a lot in WordPress, but when you want to go beyond WordPress front end, you get into the complexities that you need to start creating holes on the back end and microservices to make those occur. Whereas with Strapi, it's just a plug-in anywhere you want without disrupting the front end and being able to deliver solutions somewhere else.
Yeah, that's such a good point. That's awesome. And thank you again, Rodrigo, by the way, joining the stream. We live in the global world where you don't realize that when you schedule things at 10 a.m. CST time, some people that's 3 a.m. So my apologies again for that. And Bart?
Yeah, I think to all of our points and to the points that were made in the chat, it's important to understand that you have to pick the right tool for the job. And I think that sometimes not opening VS Code is a plus, sometimes not opening VS Code is a minus. And from my perspective as a developer, it's often the latter there. I think with what we've discussed with the landscape of development today and the plethora of choices that we have, I think seeing how you can migrate to a headless system, Strapi, is fantastic. Both Paul and Rodrigo, the fact that these sorts of things are able to do and that we've been able to show this to our viewers today is fantastic. And I'm so glad that we were able to do that, because now we have a concrete point of, hey, this is what you can do. These are the various routes you can take to make that migration, to make that change is wonderful. And I think the fact that we were all able to come together and be here to talk about this and how to really think about moving forward to Strapi is fantastic. I've had some great experiences moving agencies over. I've had some experiences where agencies didn't want to move over, and for various reasons, one was better for the other, and one perhaps wasn't. And I think Strapi remains still a very flexible solution that allows you to do so much, as illustrated by the migrations that we saw today, and even the story that Rodrigo was able to share with us about the client that his agency had worked with. Fantastic way. I'm glad we were able to get this out, have this conversation, and really continue to have this.
Yeah, and then you could always learn more on the link from TEDx.ai. Rodrigo, again, thank you again. I can't thank you enough. I'll probably keep saying thank you forever, just because I don't ever want to wake up at 3 a.m. And then Bart, thank you for I see you in the team all the time, but I can't appreciate you enough. And everybody at Strapi who makes Strapi possible is really amazing. And with that being said, I did share a link for Strapi's Discord channel, because Monday through Friday, 12:30 p.m. CST time, we do about a 1 hour and a half open office hours where you could either come and hang out or ask questions. But with that being said, thank you all. And we're going to end the stream here. And this will be a recording on YouTube for sure, probably post later today. So if you missed it or want to rewatch it, and I'll also make a summary blog post, I think it'll be great. And so thank you all for everything, and we'll see you all later. Bye, everybody.